Today's poem is Seamus Heaney's Storm on the Island. The poem itself is quite a short poem, and as such is often used by the exam boards in questions. They tend to be keeping them to the shorter, simpler poems. But there's loads of bonuses of learning poems like Storm on the Island and Ozymandias that are a little bit shorter. They're much easier to remember as a whole, but also certainly with Storm on the Island, there's at least two really detailed readings of it, so you can look at the literal and the metaphorical, meaning that you can show the examiner that you understand the poem on more than one level. So a really, really good one to know, a good one to have in the bank, because it links with a number of different poems, easy to remember and really easy to understand on those two different levels. So the three parts of the presentation on Storm on the Island, I'm going to look at the literal meaning first in the first two parts, and we'll split the poem into two sections, looking up to line 10 in this part, then we'll look at the end in the next part, and then we're going to look at the whole poem again in part 3, where we're going to look at the metaphorical reading of the poem. Okay, a little bit of context for the literal meaning of the poem. Seamus Heaney was brought up in an agricultural part of the Republic of Ireland. The Republic of Ireland we think of as Southern Ireland, below Northern Ireland, but actually there's a part of the Atlantic coast that goes up even further north than most of Northern Ireland, and it's a really exposed part of Ireland. If you look on a map, you've got nothing between there and Canada, so storms can build up over the Atlantic, and therefore you've got a very exposed community to the sea, the storms, the wind, and as such, even though it's a farming community, a rural farming community, there's very little in terms of crops because the storm batters the earth so much. And Heaney reflects that geographical location, but also the agricultural feel to the poem comes through quite significantly. Storm on the Island. We are prepared. We build our houses squat, sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so as you can see there are no stacks or stucks that can be lost. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. You know what I mean? Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale, so that you can listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. You might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs, but no. When it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. We just sit tight while wind dives and strafes invisibly. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded by the empty air. Strange. It is a huge nothing that we fear. So, seems quite complicated on first reading, particularly towards the end. And that's why I'm going to split it into two parts, because the first part is quite literal, descriptive, setting the scene almost for the tale of the storms. So let's have a look at the very first line, which is our key quote for this part. We are prepared. And I've highlighted the colon in red, and that's really crucial. We are prepared. Let's think about that as the start of a poem. We are prepared. It almost sounds like a political speech. It sounds like a rallying call to the community. It's a reassurance. Think about it. We are prepared. Don't worry. We are prepared. We've got it all in hand. And that very short 3-word statement before the colon in the first line is meant to give that tone of reassurance about the storm. That whatever it throws at us, however hard it blows, however much it tosses the sea across onto the community are ready. We are prepared. Now that plural pronoun, that first person plural pronoun we, gives that sense of community, a sense of togetherness, a sense of belonging. And that's also very important as part of the reassurance that we're all in this together. We've actually all got the same problems and we've all got the same solutions. And that togetherness is exceptionally reassuring with the storm coming. Now, let's have a look at the colon. which I've highlighted in red. What we know about a colon is that a list follows a colon. So if you list your shopping, colon, and then all of the things that you need. In this case, we are prepared, a colon followed by a list of ways in which the community are prepared. And it's followed by examples. And so, as well as the reassuring tone, it sets up exemplification by Heaney of all of the different ways and reasons for the community not to be worried by the storm. So let's have a look at those. We build our houses squat. Now, if you think of squat, short and broad, short, fat houses, if you like, much more difficult to blow over. If you imagine a lamppost, very tall and very thin, much more easily blown by the wind, whereas low and squat, short and wide, means that they withstand the battering of the storms much better. So there's one way that the community are prepared. We build our houses squat. We sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. Really interesting second line. And that's for two reasons. One, because we've got two more examples of how they are prepared. So they sink the walls deep into the rock, so very firm foundations, much more difficult to blow a house over if it's surrounded by rock. Roof them with good slate, so they use the very best building materials to ensure that slates aren't lost, as you roof and tile your house. But notice here how Heaney is using natural imagery to show man's manipulation of nature. Man is using nature in order to protect itself against nature. So they use the rock of the earth to protect themselves. They use the slate, which is a natural rock, in order to roof the houses. So man is controlling nature. So not only do we not need to fear nature, we're shown that we're in charge of nature and that it will protect us. Our use of nature will protect us against nature. Really interesting second line. So we've got three ways in which the houses are built to protect from the wind, and it links back to that tone of reassurance that Seamus Heaney's giving us. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay. Wizened, it's kind of linked to wise in the sense that it's the old earth, but wizened also means kind of worn out, overused, and so the earth now cannot provide produce, cannot provide crops for the community. It's so battered and used, it's now useless as agricultural earth. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so they don't get any hay from it. So as you see, there are no stacks or stucks that can be lost. The stacks and stucks, as you drive by in harvest time and you see all the bales of hay, none of that is produced by the earth, so none of that can be lost. But what's interesting is Heaney's use of colloquial language. Colloquial language is sort of everyday language, the language that you would use with your friends, the language that you would naturally turn to. And there's a couple of examples. So as you see, we've just got that. A little bit later, he says, you know what I mean? It's a conversational tone from Heaney to the audience. He's chatting to us naturally. And why is that important? It comes back to the tone of reassurance. If Heaney was using very formal language, we talked initially about a sort of political speech, it might make us worry more. It's not natural. However, he's using natural conversational tones. And that reassures the community because it makes the storm seem like an everyday issue. It makes it seem like this is natural. It's no problem. You know what I mean. So as you see, and we don't worry so much about the storm because it's everyday. It's conversation. We don't need to use different language to describe it because it's there all the time. So that tone of reassurance comes through the first part in that we are prepared, that very simple short statement before the colon, and it also comes through the colloquial tone that Heaney uses. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. You know what I mean? Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale. So let's focus on the trees. Trees proving company. The idea that man and nature live side by side. The trees then provide some sort of shelter from the wind. They're a reassuring presence. However, as Heaney says, there are no trees which might prove company. So in this case, nature doesn't provide natural protection in that way. That is why we have to roof with good slate and sink walls into the rock, make use of nature ourselves, because nature isn't providing those trees as the natural shelter. But there's a few interesting phrases there with the trees. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale. Tragic chorus is pretty much an oxymoron. It's certainly an interesting collocation. A chorus feels like a celebratory verse, doesn't it? You know, we join in the chorus of songs and so forth. A chorus is a group of people singing together, but a tragic chorus. So actually, if you think about how the wind blows and how the wind makes noise, the wind in itself doesn't make noise. It's the wind blowing through things like trees that make the noise. So the lack of trees is both a reassurance and a shame. A shame in the sense that it provides no natural shelter, but it's also reassurance because we don't get that wind whistling through the trees, that scary sound of the wind rustling the branches and making it seem grander and more scary than it actually is. So the trees are both a blessing and a curse. A curse because they don't stop the storms coming in from the Atlantic, but also a blessing because they don't create that tragic chorus in the gale. Now, also, we've got the blows full blast. We've got the use of some quite violent verbs in this part of the poem. Blows full blast, and then a little bit later on, forgetting that it pummels your house too, and that violent verb, pummels. So, what Heaney's doing here is he's extending that idea of the lack of trees. If we hear the wind blowing through the trees, we start to feel more afraid because of that horrific sound. But we forget that actually it doesn't make a sound against our houses, and our houses are withstanding that storm. So we forget that it pummels our house too. We forget that because the house is standing firm, and that's what we would worry about. We wouldn't worry about anything else blowing over. It's our buildings, it's our homes that we need to worry about. So again, that tone is reassuring. And the use of violent verbs like blows and violent plosive sounds, blows, blast, I'll come on to plosives again in a minute, and pummels, shows the strength of the wind, but the tone is still reassuring because it's hitting our house, and our houses, as we know from the reassuring tone at the start, our houses are safe. Okay? So it's reassuring all the way through about the weather. There are no trees, no natural shelter, so that nature hasn't provided. Line 11 there shows us that there's no natural barrier to the wind. There's nothing that nature provides, so we have to use it ourselves, as I've mentioned before. Let's come back to the plosives. Plosives are sounds that almost explode out of your mouth. So a b sound, a p sound, a t sound, a k sound are plosives because they are one short, sharp blow of breath out into the air. And they create a sort of explosive sound, which is why they're called plosives. Okay? Now what we've got here is alliteration of plosives. Let's think about that idea of a plosive, an explosion of sound. Heaney is trying to make the wind sound scarier, sound more dramatic, sound violent. And that alliteration, blows full blast, you'll get extra marks if you suggest the reason that Heaney uses those sounds, those plosive sounds, is to make the wind sound explosive, to make it sound more dangerous, more violent. Also remember that p is a plosive sound, pummels, and again that use of a plosive in those violent verbs really highlights the strength of the wind.